going to go ahead and get started. My name is Dakota Moore. I'm with the Kentucky Horticulture Council. I'll tell you a little bit about that in a minute, but today we're going to talk about drying and pressing flowers, making flowers last longer than our vase so that we can enjoy them for a long, long time. A little background on myself. I do work for the Kentucky Horticulture Council. I am originally from Nashville, but I've got family from Smithsonian down in Marshall County, or Graves County on the Marshall County line. And I went to school at Murray State for my bachelor's and my master's in agriculture, specifically horticulture. And then I have 3 years experience as a floral designer before my current position. While I was a floral designer, we utilized dried stuff all the time. We made dried arrangements, dried wreaths. It was a good way to not throw away flowers that maybe weren't going to last long enough if we sent them out, or maybe didn't look too good in our cooler, they still look okay dry. They were big in the 70s and 80s and kind of fell out of fashion, but we've seen a resurgence in a lot of the dried stuff. I was at the Kentucky Florist Association convention this past weekend, and some of the trends they were talking about, they're still using dried stuff but incorporating it in fresh arrangements. So that's going to be things like sticks and some balls like we'll talk about in a minute, but it's more of a combination of the two. So it's back in style, really on trend with a lot of design trends as well, more natural look, more neutral colors, go great with some of our dried stuff. My work with the Kentucky Horticulture Council, we provide technical assistance and education for commercial producers of horticulture crops. So whether that's fruit, vegetable, cut flowers, nursery crops, lawn and landscape crews, anybody that is doing horticulture commercially, so selling and making a profit, hopefully making a profit. We provide them with education. So we do online webinars, and we have YouTube videos. Those are for anybody to consume. We have conferences, and we do farm visits, so one-on-one education. Some of our focus that we work with, a lot of direct marketing, so helping farmers sell their products directly to consumers. Some ag water safety, so making sure they are growing healthy produce for consumers and we're not making people sick. We do a lot of work with the Farm to School Network, so getting foods into schools, whether that's cafeteria, into the classroom to learn and educate, and also help them do some school gardens. And then finally, cut flower promotion and education. This is my passion at the Kentucky Horticulture Council. So I get to work with our cut flower growers. In the last 4 years that I've been there, we now have about 130 flower farmers that we work with. There is about 230 in the state. So it's a lot more prevalent than you would think. So these farmers are producing a lot of pretty much all the things I've got here today all came from local farms or straight from my own garden. If you're interested in buying local cut flowers, every July we do Kentucky Grown Cut Flower Month. So if you've got a camera on your phone and you want to scan that, that takes you to a Facebook group that is full of farm stories, information on finding flower farms, some videos on how to use local flowers that I've gotten to make by visiting farms. So a lot of different resources on that. If you can't scan it, maybe afterwards you can scan it from my computer. You got 10 seconds. Okay, so let's get to what we're here to talk about. So what should we press and what should we dry? First off, not everything's going to dry well. We can try, but it may not make it. We may not get it to the driest stage. And then some things that will dry are not going to be what we call everlasting. So they look pretty today, but maybe not next month. Or maybe if you try to move it from where you have it, it's going to fall to pieces. So some things dry a lot better than others. Some things don't dry well at all. Pressing is a whole other ballgame. We'll get to that later on. But it's also going to have the same issues. So things that hold too much moisture are going to rot. Things that are very thin when they're fresh are going to be really thin and brittle when they die, or when they dry, or pressed. So we have to keep an eye on, one, what we're drying and how we're drying it, and then two, making sure we are keeping them in good condition. One big issue is the color. So we've all seen flowers that have dried on the plant basically, and they don't look the same as they did. Same thing happens when you dry it. We'll talk about a few tips to maybe keep the color, but some things it's going to be hard to. That depends on their moisture content and the speed at which you dry. So because of that, not all of the drying methods are going to work for every bloom. Some things are not going to press well, so that might be a waste of time. Some things are not going to air dry well and be recognizable as a flower. They might just look like a piece of paper you wadded up. The example on the screen, this is gladiolus. So I've seen examples of good dried glads, but a lot of times you're going to see a lot of issues with it. First off, the color does not stay very well. The blooms are so succulent in their petals. They have so much moisture. That's going to cause discoloration because it takes so long to dry. It's going to lose more of the color. And then the shape is not going to be desirable. Then we get to the stem. That stem is very thick and solid. So that holds a lot of moisture, and it's going to take a long time to dry. So while it takes long to dry, that's going to increase our chance of mildew or rot. So that's the last thing we want when we're trying to dry something. You may end up with it dry, but it's white and growing something else. So my favorite way to dry and the easiest is air drying. We're just letting it dry. On its own, we're not pressing it, we're not changing newspaper, but there's some tips to keep this a good method. The key is dryness, obviously. We can't dry in a very humid or moist environment. There's too much moisture in the air, so it's not being pulled out as easily. Good ventilation, it goes hand in hand with that. If we've got airflow and air movement, our moisture that is being pulled out of the leaves and petals is going to move away if there's airflow. If there's not airflow, it's just going to sit there. And then the warmth. But too warm is not always great. You can dry too fast and make it too brittle. But just the room temperature in your home, as long as you don't keep it freezing, it should be good. The fastest dry is going to give us our best color and conditions. So we want to make sure we are dry, good ventilation, and warm. That's going to help it keep the color the fastest. Drying upside down is my preferred method just because of space. You can hang it on the wall or hang it from the ceiling fan or a drying rack that you put your laundry on. But it's always best to dry as soon as possible. So later, we've got a camera so you can see things more easily. So I'm not going to show my examples just yet, but I've got an example of something that dried very long versus something that dried very quickly. So we can see how those compare. And drying as soon as possible after harvest is going to give us the best quality. So if we have it sitting in our house, in water, the petals are going to start to fall off. We've all seen that. That's not the best time to dry because your dried flower is going to have half its petals gone. So hanging upside down, you get the best color this way. A lot of times the color will stay in the petals if it's upside down versus in the vase. The moisture is going to not come out of the bottom of the stem. It's going to go towards the flowers. And that moisture is going to contain the nutrients and the enzymes that give us that color. The key when you hang these upside down is to bundle them for saving space. So I do have an example I can show, and we'll show it under the camera as well. So this is like a little hanger that clamps together and keeps your stems together. But I can only dry so many stems on there versus these bundles you see in the PowerPoint pictures. Not only does it allow us to dry more at one time, it's going to give us a finished product as soon as it's done. We're not then having to bundle after it's dry. It's bundled. We can keep that bundle hanging on our wall. We can drop that bundle down into a vase. It's done. So first step is remove the lower leaves of the stems. If we are going for that attractive look like those photos, you can see the twine and the rope. We probably want to see that if we're going to continue to hang it upside down. That means we need to clear out any of the leaves that are going to block that. Also, removing those is going to allow us to have a tighter knot. So keeping those bound is important as they dry, because the stems will shrink as they start to dry, and if your knot is not tight enough, then they'll start to fall on your floor. And we're working with brittle things now at this point, so we don't want those to come into contact with the hard surface. So once we've stripped those lower leaves, we'll gather it into a small bunch. Securing it with rope is great. Just make sure it's as tight as you can get it without breaking the stems. And you can also use a rubber band if that works better for you. The rubber band is going to hold things tighter as they shrink. You could do the rubber band and then wrap it with the twine so you don't see it. Whatever works for you. Tape, same thing. The next step, we're going to layer the balloons. So you can see in these photographs, they're not all at the bottom of the thing that's hanging. So that way we get the color throughout our bundle, plus that allows airflow, and it's not going to squish the flowers together, putting them into like undesirable shapes. This is not too hard. You can lay it down on your counter, layer it that way, then gather. The other option is hanging right side up. So this one, you need a little more space, but this could be key for a lot of flowers that maybe don't dry in attractive positions. So pictured there is a zinnia, like a single layer petaled zinnia. So this one, if we hung it upside down, it's going to, make that tulip shape. Maybe we want that shape. A lot of times you don't if you want people to know it's a zinnia. So we can hang it upside down like you see here. Things like Queen Anne's lace, a lot of our asters, daisies, things that have those petals that will close up if we hang them upside down. So this example uses chicken wire, and then they just spaced out the zinnias ever so often. This one would take up a lot of space. You're probably going to have to build some sort of contraption to do this. You could use a wire screen and maybe poke holes that your stems would go through. That would work as well, but you also then have to have a space for that. Another reason to do this is drying in unlifelike shapes. So if our end goal is to maybe put them in a vase, we don't want something that normally droops, like the hanging amaranthus, which is going to droop out of our vase to give us a nice flow of the eye. We don't want it standing straight up, because then it wouldn't be a hanging amaranthus, it would just be another spike. So we can lay it flat or hang it down through that wire to give us that shape we want when it's dry. So part of this is thinking about how we want our bloom to look when we start designing with it. This one I've not done too often. I've done it a few times. It does take up a lot of space, so I did not continue to do that. You can play around and come up with your own contraption. I've seen people make cones out of chicken wire, and they poke the petals or the stem through the inside to the outside so it's bent, but I'll show you a trick to get the shape we want once we switch to the camera. So vase dry, this is another easy way. So I've got a great example of an arrangement I let dry a few weeks ago for us so we can see what it looks like. I find it easier to dry and then design with the dried stuff versus drying my arrangement, because not everything I put in the arrangement may dry well, or may dry well in this upright position. But some things do like to dry in a vase. That will give you a nice flow, a nice shape for some of your stems, and some it may help them keep their color a little more. And I've got a great example of that, and also a picture. So hydrangeas are one that you can dry in a vase with a little bit of water. We don't want to leave water all the way at the stem because that could cause rot if we're waiting on it to dry, the whole stem that's submerged. So just a few inches of water, that's going to allow the color to stay a little better in certain things. So hydrangeas, allium, those will do okay. So those are the purple onion smelling blooms. And then heather is another one that dries well in a little bit of water. But not everything dries super well this way. The other example is straw flower. We can see the drooped shape of the stem with the bloom on the bottom. This is okay if you want that look. I can tell you those stems are very fragile. So if we have it in that shape, we have to keep them, keep a sharp eye on them when we're using them. So just a few examples of things that you can grow here in Kentucky and are often sold by flower farmers that will dry really well. The first one is straw flower. If you've ever gone to Lowe's or Walmart and bought a cactus that had a brightly colored bloom on it, that was glued on and it was most likely a straw color. So if you see those, that's not your cactus's bloom. I'm sorry to hurt your feelings. But that shows you how well this dries. It's so papery already, pretty much instant dry on the flower itself. The stem, though, shrinks really small, so it becomes a little fragile and hard to work with. Sometimes the head will also hang in a way that you don't want. I do have some examples of that, so y'all can come up at the end and take a look at those, feel the petals. I've actually got boutonniere I made about a year ago that uses one, and it's still looks really good. Next up is marigolds. So these maybe don't keep the flower shape as well as the straw flower, but they keep the color very well. The marigold color stays pretty strong. Some of the white varieties that people are growing now maybe turn a little tan or brown, but the orange stays really nicely. A lot of countries in Asia dry marigolds for different reasons. They make like leis and big arches out of marigolds that are fresh and they let them dry, so they stay nice a long time. Zinnias, this is probably one of the most common garden flowers. They dry nicely. The flower shape is a little off, especially if you hang them upside down in bundles. But if you want that pop of color, they keep their color usually fairly well, at least for a year or so. I have some dried things we'll look at that have been dried for a couple of years now, and they've started to lose their color, but they kept their color mostly for the first year or so. Safflower, this is my favorite one on the list. I finally got one to bloom this year, so I'm really excited, and I did dry it. So we can take a look of some that was dried 3 years ago and some that was dried a few weeks ago. So we can look at, under the camera, the color difference. But this is a really fun one. It dries pretty solid. The orange little tufts, you think they would fall out, but they stay pretty solid. Some things that have little frilly flowers will often drop those, but this is one that hangs on to it. Eucalyptus, really, really easy to dry, and it smells good still after it's dried for a good bit. The eucalyptus I brought has lost its smell, but I've had it for about 7 years, so it doesn't last that long. But the color is starting to brown more than it did, but it's still really nice. I've got some fresher versions that we can look at as well. Solidago, so this is also known as goldenrod or state flower. You can see it blooming along the roadsides this time of the year. It dries nicely. I'm not going to tell you it keeps that yellow color perfectly, but it holds on to it fairly nicely. It's not going to drop those little tiny petals everywhere, unless you go baking it about. So Craspedia, this is also called Billy Buttons, Billy Balls, I think Jolly Buttons, something with Jolly in the name. But these are really fun because half the time, if you don't look at the stem, you don't know if it's fresh or dry. So that yellow ball stays pretty similar. I should have mentioned, the photos on the left of all of these slides have been fresh, and the ones on the right are the dried. So it's hard to tell with the Craspedia because it looks very similar. And I've got lots of examples of that up here because it dries so nicely. And then finally, Celosia. So you've probably grown this before too. Celosia is like the scientific name, like Craspedia. But there's also the coxcomb varieties. You may have grown those. That's more of like an heirloom plant because they produce so many seeds. So people pass the seeds down from generation to generation. And the dried celosia will also pass its seeds onto your carpet and your countertop and your floor. So we want to make sure when we're drying the celosia that we are vacuuming up the seeds because it's a lot more than you think. You'll think you spilled like black sand on the floors. Yeah, someone said hairspray, you can do that probably after it dries. And I do have a commercial spray that's for dried flowers to help them last a little longer. But celosia is a great one. It does keep its color fairly nicely. I've got other examples we'll talk about, but I didn't include them in the slideshow because we'd be here all night. So we'll just move on to pressing. So this is the one I have the least experience in on the flower side. I've pressed mini weed leaf in order to identify weeds, and we can show my book I brought that is laminated pressed weeds. Sadly, I looked at the date of when I made this, and it reminded me that I made it 10 years ago. So that's always fun. But they look really nice still. I made this in college for a class I had on weed ID, and we can look at those through the camera, and you all are welcome to come up afterwards. But pressing with flowers is really popular now. I've seen a lot of brides wanting their flowers pressed from their bouquet instead of made into a candle or enamel products. So a lot of them are wanting their bouquets pressed. And the people that are pressing them are, making them very pretty in a nice frame for them that they can hang on their wall. The issue that I don't like with pressing is that it only creates 2D flowers and foliage. It's hard to use if you want an arrangement. It's great on your wall, but if you want to use it with some other things you're drying, that's hard to do. Except the foliage. So there is some foliage that can be pressed, that's often better pressed, that you can utilize in dried arrangements. Things that are flat, so think ferns, iris leaves, lily leaves, gladiolus leaves. Those are all very flat, so they can be pressed and then utilized in a fresh design. If we were to hang those upside down, they might curl up and give us nice tubes, but we wouldn't know what it was. The intended use, though, of these is what's going to determine how we press it. What's the best method? So the foliage is going to be really different than the flowers if we're wanting to use the foliage in a 3D arrangement. So the keys to pressing are pretty similar to the drying keys. So dryness, good ventilation, and warmth. Those are pretty common across the board. We need that moisture pulled out of our leaves and our petals no matter how we're doing it. You really have to monitor for the mildew in the pressing, though. We'll talk about the different ways to do it, but a key is going to be changing out the materials that are surrounding our leaves and our petals because they're pulling the moisture out, and we need to remove them at that point from the petals and the leaves. Thicker or more succulent blooms and leaves may take a long time to dry. So it's more moisture that has to be pulled out. If we're hanging something, there's air all around it. When we're pressing, there's not much air around it. So we've got to give it some more time to hold up. The issue then is the color loss. So that could be an issue when pressing that we always have to monitor. I've seen a big trend is ironing flowers for drying. I've not tried this myself, but I would be a little skeptical of it. So I've seen some blogs say ironing and you're done. Others say iron and then press. So they're using the iron to get the shape. That makes sense. So then they can press it and dry it. But the ironing is not going to pull out the moisture. So I've seen videos of them, they lay out their pretty little ironing board and their pretty little parchment paper, and they iron on their Tiffany colored iron, and then they're done. But I don't think that would cover. You can see this bottom photo is a photo I found that someone had ironed. The color looks really nice, but that petal looks really, really thin. So I'd be afraid to pull that off of the parchment paper. It may fall to pieces. Also, I don't know if you can tell on the slide so much, but the parchment paper has created ridges in this flower. So that will happen when you're pressing, but the iron just exacerbated that, I believe. But feel free to give it a try and see if you can figure it out. The top photo, those are some very succulent, very moist blooms. So the ranunculus, which is the white in the front, that's one that I would be a little worried about the center of that flower when we're pressing. With something like that, we'd be changing our paper and our parchment paper every day or every few hours on that one. So the most common and coolest way to press is through pressure and weight. The weight creates the pressure, but we're also providing places for the moisture to go. This gives us that really flat look as well. These presses are easy to make. If you have some plywood, you just cut 2 pieces to the same size, drill some holes, and use, they've got bolts with the little twists down to create that pressure. When I started pressing leaves, I did not have the budget to do that. So I had some scrap plywood, I had a big pile of newspapers, and then I had a bungee cord and some books. So I didn't have the real fancy twist down, but I made it work. The important part, no matter which way you do it, is that you have layers that are going to pull that moisture out. So typically people use layers of newspaper, parchment paper, or flat cardboard. You probably want to use a combination of all of these. I did not use the cardboard or parchment paper, I just had newspaper. But I was constantly moving those leaves to other pieces of newspaper. So I'd take a little stack, put my leaves in, do it all the way down, put my books in pressure. The next day I would pull it all out, switch it all to new pieces of newspaper, hang those other ones up to dry. It was always surprising how moist they felt. It felt like you had left them on your front porch overnight and the dew got on them. So without throwing them away, I just hung them up to dry, and then I repeated that for a few weeks. Some of them can take weeks, some of them dry pretty quickly. It all depends on how thick the leaves are. I was not going for color per se when I was drying, more for shape, so I could identify. I knew the color would be perfect, even if I, dried it instantly, but I was going for the shape of the leaf, so that's why I went with the pressing. The color a lot of flowers might have issue with is the newspaper print may transfer to a lot of blooms. So then you could use either copy paper on each side, white copy paper. If if you want to pull that moisture out, or you could use parchment paper. A lot of people use the parchment paper because it's easier to reuse, but you may want to keep an eye on the ridges. Cardboard, same thing. We want flat cardboard. I would always put like parchment paper or copy paper between your cardboard and your flowers and leaves. But if you're putting too much pressure, that corrugation in the cardboard may be transferring some texture onto your leaves or your petals. So that's something to keep in mind as well. The good thing about this, hopefully you're not spending a lot of money on what you're pressing. Maybe it's something you're finding or something, flowers that were given to you. So play around with it, see what works best for you. But the key is changing out those moisture wicking materials often so that we don't create mildew or mold. We're trying to pull the moisture away. If we leave that newspaper there, we're just putting the moisture on the newspaper, but it's still touching the leaves. So pressing in a pile is another way to press things that we might want to use in a 3D arrangement. So our leaves that are longer, or we want a certain shape or texture, we don't want them super flat and rigid, we can press in a pile of newspapers. So we're not putting any weight on the pile other than more newspaper on top. So that's going to allow more airflow. It's going to create more of a curve or shape to some of our leaves, give them a little more lifelike look. That is also going to need to be changed out daily. And this may take a little longer too, because we're not pressing a lot of that moisture out with the pressure. But it's going to give you things that you could use with your other dried stuff. Like I said, the bottom one is the key. So you got to swap out your newspaper or your parchment paper every day. So we're coming up on the end of the slideshow before we get to the video to have a look at everything. There are a few other drying methods. So these I've never tried other than the silica gel. We tried that in college. But these are some methods that are probably a little out of favor now, not often used very much. A lot of the people that are either drying stuff or purchasing dried materials to use in their house probably want them for the natural look. And the word natural, they maybe don't use a lot of chemicals on these flowers for the drying. But sand and borax are probably the easier, cheaper versions if you want to try something different. These methods are all to help dry things that either don't dry well or have just horrendous shapes once they're dried. Like the geraniums up there. They're going to lose their color, the petals are going to start to fall off easily, they're going to be ugly shaped. So we can try either sand or borax. The key to this is you pour a layer of whatever you're choosing in the bottom of a flat, large container. Pour a little layer, and then we're putting our flowers in either upright, like you can see the geranium blooms there, so that the stem will be straight because it's coming out the top. Or if you're doing something like a spike, you can lay it down in that tub in more of the shape you're looking for. And then you slowly pour the rest of your material over top to just encase it in either the sand or the borax. These are going to hold things in place while they dry. Neither of these will pull moisture out. They're just holding something in place while it dries without it like laying on a counter. If we laid something down, it's going to be flat on one side. The sand does not pull out the moisture, it just holds things in a position. The borax is recommended 1 part borax to 3 parts cornmeal. I think you could choose whichever you want. The cornmeal might pull a little moisture out, so you may get a little bit there, but it also might then become mildewy because if you add water to cornmeal, then it's going to make almost cornbread. So those are 2 things you could try, fairly cheap, reusable. I don't know how reusable the cornmeal would be over time, but I've not tried this. Now looking at the more chemical classified drying methods, we have silica gel. You've probably seen this at a hobby store. It does work great. It pulls the moisture out. It's those little packets that come in your shoes and other products that's going to pull a desiccant, so it's pulling the moisture out of the air. So it's just using that to pull the moisture out of these petals, out of these stems. We do it just like the sand and the borax. You pour it in a container, a layer, layer on the bottom, your flowers, and then more of the material, the silica gel. But then we have to put the lid on. So the other one is open, this one is closed. That's going to allow it to pull the moisture out of the stems and the flowers and not the air. Because it might make your house less damp, but it's not going to dry the flowers. There's a few issues with this. Timing is big, so if you leave them more than 5 to 7 days, most things are going to become too brittle. So it's going to pull out so much moisture, it's just created, something that you can blow on and blow to pieces. The other issue is that when they're pulled out of the silica gel, they will begin to reabsorb moisture. If you have a very dry house, that may not be an issue. But if your house is very damp, then which is very common in our parts because of the humidity being 100% all the time, they'll start to reabsorb. I'm not going to say they're going to re-plump up like they were before, but they're going to become softer. So they'll begin to droop more easily, and then over time it could just start to grow mold. This is used in like displays or like at museums. So a lot of times those are airtight, so they'll dry things in silica gel and then put it in that airtight space. You could also dry something, put it in a container that, like a clear glass that has a lid, and make your design in there, close it up. The calash, which is like a bell jar sitting on top of something, that might be used. You could do a little dry arrangement with the things that were dried with the silica gel and put that lid on and leave it. That might work. But if you want it out in your house, make a wreath with it. Ideal. The last one is glycerin. So this one is the best for foliage. You may have bought like fall leaves at a hobby store that were dried with silica or with glycerin. So a lot of times those were maybe on a stem that was wired, and then those are glued and wired into the stem. So it looks like a silk or a fresh arrangement, but it's leaves that have been dried with glycerin. They have a really lifelike feel, a little rubbery, but more lifelike than the fake flowers you've bought. It does darken greatly. So these are some magnolia leaves. You can see the green fresh behind, the leaves that have been dried with the glycerin in the front. So that's a big color difference. This one can be expensive and a little messy. So some things I've seen that you will soak completely in the glycerin, but a lot of things we're taking a vase, setting our stems in it, pouring a little glycerin in the bottom, and it soaks up like it would water. You have to constantly re-add as it drinks up that glycerin, but over time you'll have a lifelike feeling leaves or petals. I've seen examples of this done in museums as well. Things like dahlias, which are very pretty blooms, are very hard to dry nicely. I may have an example of one. I actually do. And it's not very pretty. So the glycerin is used to dry those dahlias and make them last forever. But that's very expensive. So I think that's it on our slideshow. We can switch to the video, and I'll show off some of the stuff we've been talking about, and a few techniques that you might be able to use for drying.
We can use kitty litter.
I don't know. Maybe the issue with something like that, along with the borax, might be dust. So it may be hard to get the dust off of your blooms once you're done. That also might be a little expensive. I know my grandmother's always complaining about how much it costs for her tax. So that might not be ideal, but it would be certainly fun to try. So where should we start first? I'll show y'all some examples of the things we were talking about. Okay. Okay, look good? Okay, Okay, so those dahlias I mentioned. How does that look? Pretty good? Color's nice, attractive, but the flower shape is not, and we just lost a petal, so not the best. So here are some of the straw flower. You can see they look real lifelike, color's nice, but the stem is very drooped and curved. Not the best unless you can find something specific to it. Here's some coxcomb. These examples are probably 5 to 6 years old, so they're starting to lose their color a lot. But they hold the coxcomb holds its shape very nicely. Real fun, interest. They look like brains, like especially this one, I think. And then some things dry better, like maybe without leaves. So here's some echinacea coneflower. It's a fun, like interest, really spiky. The petals aren't always the most attractive when dried. I've seen them dry nicely, but when you hang those upside down, they're going to droop and cover up this cool spike. Here's some eucalyptus that maybe has a little more color, but it's starting to fade. And I'll grab my example of the eucalyptus I've had for a really long time. It's really nice and straight, really nice spray, but it is brown now instead of that gray it was when I first tried it. But this would be great to use in an arrangement. So I've got one already made, but we could add some of the spikes to it. So these are the Crispidia, the billy balls, billy buttons, and I've got a frog in the bottom of this clear vase. So a frog, you may have seen the metal pin frogs. This one I've actually found some clear plastic frogs. So you'll have to come up and take a look. So that way you can't really see it in this glass. But then if I wanted to add something else, I just slide these down in there to add a little more. If I want a little pop of something else. So if this is an example of something I've dried separately and then made. Thank you. And then here's an example of a vase that I actually did a floral design class in Graves County a few weeks ago. And these are the resulting flowers. How beautiful. So I dried it in the vase. You can see the shape is not great because a lot of things drooped. So I maybe wouldn't want to dry these this way. These might be something I would dry separately and then reassemble. I probably have some mold down in there. I don't want to take a look. And then there's some great examples of things that don't dry super well. This is a Cosmo, so it definitely did not like drying in a vase. Let's see, this pretty Scadiosa, it dried in a nice shape. It's not falling apart. It made it here from Murray, but it's drooped, so it's not very attractive. The Snapdragon is not doing too great. But what looks really nice is the Status. So I've got a whole big bucket of Status up here. So this is another one that's almost papery. The petals are so papery, and they hold their colors so nicely. This bucket is 2 years. I think it's 2 years. I think I've been stepping over this bucket in my kitchen for 2 years. But it's all held its color really nicely. This lavender was exceptional. This was the color it was when I got it. This dark purple as well. That's so vibrant. I do have examples of Status that is fairly older, but I guess I didn't bring it. Okay, sorry. Let's see. Here's some Status that I pulled out of this arrangement and dried separately so it could keep its shape nicely. But 2 weeks, perfect. I could use it in a dry arrangement. So my examples of the safflower. So this is probably 4 or 5 years old. Still looks really nice, really cool. Cool tan color with the pop-up orange. But here is some that is freshly dried. So Still a little bit of green in those calyx, and then the petals are super vibrant. These are really fun. I did also want to show you a comparison between air dried that I hung upside down versus vase dried. So this is Rattlesnake Master. The name sounds so scary, but it's really fun and cute. It's these little balls that are green, real spiky. It's a native, Kentucky native. The leaves look like a yucca plant or maybe an aloe, kind of long and wispy with spikes that aren't real spikes. But it produces this really cool ball. So this was dried in a vase. There's a lot of discolorment on my stem. They're really yellow, and then a brown that looks rotten, but it's pretty hard and solid. But the balls have a nice green. So if I wanted the green balls, I might put up with the yellow stem. This is some that I dried by hanging upside down. So it's a nice, pretty green stem, but the balls are brown. So that's really interesting how the color flopped on that one. This is extremely hard though. Let's see if we can get a good sound if I could. It was pretty hard. The one that dried in the vase, not so much. So there's probably pros and cons to both with this one. These I stole from the florist convention the other day, so don't tell anybody. These are Crispidia, the Billy Balls, but they've been painted. So this is pretty on trend right now to paint some dried stuff. Maybe like some status if you wanted a really cool, funky color. And then you would be able to pop these into like a fresh arrangement. I brought a few fresh things to talk about, but it would look really cool next to that. So that's kind of how I see the trend going, is more like dried stuff used with fresh, because we're really trying to sell the fresh stuff. We make more money that way. The drying stuff in a flower shop takes a while to sell. You know, you gotta dry it, it's hanging up, and then you gotta find some way to use it and then sell it. Fresh stuff we can send out the door very quickly. So those are those examples. Let's see. So another example of a comparison. And like I said earlier, you may find ways to dry that work better for you that I maybe didn't cover. This is going to be a great example of that. My grandmother has always dried hydrangeas. She dried these in her car. So she utilized somehow, I guess she was the only person that utilized our 1,000-degree weather we had a few weeks ago by drying these in her car. So they were probably in there a day, so they dried really quickly. I would not recommend drying for much longer. They might start to bleach in the sun and getting too hot. I do see a little browning, probably from it being too hot. She did just lay them down on her dash in the front. So they are a little one-sided, they're a little flat, but they still look nice. So if she had a bunch laying out there, then we could make a nice dry arrangement that you wouldn't know they were flat. So those compared to these were dried in a vase with a little bit of water. So they held their color really nicely, but the flowers are like crinkled and look bluish. This one's not too bad, but this darker blue is really unrecognizable as a hydrangea, I think. But that's a nice comparison. You might be able to dry them in your car too. I would not recommend the oven. We might start fires that way. But there are some presses that people are selling for the microwave. I have not tried those. I do not know how they work. That scares me a little bit. So be wary of that. If you look one up, learn how to do it and purchase the press. It needs a special press, apparently, for microwaving. Just make sure there's no metal in it. You never know. Let's see. Oh, some of my favorite stuff that's dried. And these are things we utilize a lot in the flower shop, in like wreaths or along with the fresh flowers. So these sadly are not a Kentucky grown. This is my only non-Kentucky grown. This is Fuji branches, or kiwi branches, I'm sorry. We do have a hardy kiwi that grows here in Kentucky. I don't think they get the very attractive branches that are curled like this, but maybe. But these are really fun. These are nice to add to an arrangement to give us a nice, cool interest point. You know, they can go both ways and give us a nice flowing shape. But these are really fun. These are my own discovery. So I love okra, but I hate eating okra. I love growing okra to dry it. So it's also really fun in fresh arrangements too. I prefer red okra because it's a nice red, solid color from the ground up. They have pretty hibiscus-looking flowers. Those don't last super long, but the pods, when they're red, add really nice, attractive feature to fresh arrangements, and the dried ones do as well. So when they start to dry, they want to split open. The pods start to split. That way the seeds can come out. But in doing so, it gives us this really cool striped effect. You can hear the seeds rattling around. But these are really cool, really fun. The key to doing this is to not harvest them when you would to harvest to eat. So when you harvest to eat, you want 2 inches, otherwise they're tough. But for this, I want the longer pod, so it's great. If you don't get out in time to harvest, you can leave them on, and then you can have something nice to cut. These I dried hanging upside down. I bet if I left them in water to dry, like in a based arrangement, they might not turn out as nice. But these are probably 6 or 7 years old. I planted them once in the garden, and they reseed so much that we never have to plant again. The plants do get taller than myself, so they get really, really big. So you can end up with a lot of these. So these are really fun. And then finally, the lotus pods. Lotus is grown here in Kentucky, so it's easy to get these from the water. I got these from a Kentucky grower in Dawson Springs that went out on the lakes there. That's just covered in these. But they have little seeds too. But they're really fun. We used to sell these in the flower shop all the time. We would purchase ours in, but you can get these local as well. So I think we've covered the examples. And then we'll get into a little how-to stuff. So this is that boutonniere I made at the Florist Convention last year. It's got the straw flower. Y'all will have to come up and rub your fingers on it and see how it sounds so papery. And then I have a little tiny Crospedia, some feverfew. Feverfew dries nicely with a yellow center and tiny little white flowers. Let's see, the hanger. So these were things that I took out of this vase and hung up to dry. They look a lot nicer, except the mint. The mint did not dry well. But the Lysianthus is dried, or starting to. It's got a nice color and a nice shape. We've got this pretty scabiosa. And now it's not drooped like the one we looked at before. It's got a nice straight stem. And then a zinnia. So you can see how the leaves have curled down. So it's maybe not looking like a zinnia. I had to think a minute what it was. I was like, I didn't have to tell you that. But it's a zinnia. But more of the status, which is a great one to dry. I do have a wreath I made a couple of years ago. I would have loved to bring a ton of bundles that I had dried, but I lent them to someone last year, and they have not found their way home. So we don't have those to look at. But here's a wreath I made at the state fair a few years ago on stage. They invited me to do flower designs using local flowers on their cooking stage. And one year I decided to do a dried arrangement as well. So I made a wreath. It's lost a lot of its stuff over the past few years, but we've got things like pampas grass. Those have shed a lot, but they still add something fun. A lot of wax flower tucked in there. And then gomphrena. So gomphrena is you've probably seen it as well, a little white. This one is white to a pink. There's more pink tucked in here. But they're tiny little flowers. They dry very easily. So that's my examples, but I do have a few techniques I want to show you. So I did bring fresh stuff. If I'm working with dried flowers, and I want to make an arrangement in a container that I can use foam in to give it a nice sturdy, secure media, and I can use foam. So if I'm working with really large stems like this, well, let's let you get set up really quick. Okay, so the sturdy stems can go in this foam really nicely. It's really hard to get in this more airy foam. It's called like styrofoam foam, might be called styrofoam, floral foam. There's a lot of different types of floral foam, but this one is more styrofoamy and fairly hard. I would not be able to use very fragile stems in this. Well, that one worked. That proved me wrong. Dang. Let's see. Let's find something very soft. Here we go. So, can we see it? Yep, see it. Okay, it went in, but it broke as well. So it's a lot shorter than I needed. But they make something called dry foam. It looks very similar, other than it's really soft. So things go in very easily. I would recommend using the dry foam instead of the harder foam, especially if your stuff you dried is very brittle. A lot of hollow stem, if you cut it and there's a hollow stem, you can probably bet it's going to be a little brittle compared to things that are solid. Next up, so here is, I showed you the metal frog and the clear frog. This is a glass frog, so you may have seen these as well. These could be used on top of a vase to slide your dried stems through the holes, but it may not be what you need if you want something really sturdy. Okay, so a few things. If you're making a wreath, the best thing I've found is to glue. So you can buy these glue pans at a hobby store. You use like glue sticks, or you can buy little chopped up glue sticks that go in there to help you secure your things to your wreath. I find it easy, instead of having to stick every tiny little stem in, I find it easy to make your own little bundles. So let's see. Let's find a few things we can use. So I've put a few stems together. So instead of doing these all separate, I can tape them together. And then when I'm gluing and putting them in the wreath, I'm only sticking it in the glue once. That makes it go a lot faster, and with these fragile stems, the tape gives it a little more sturdy hold, and then you just push it into your wreath in between the branches. So it makes it a lot easier doing it that way. I've seen people making wreaths with the straw flower where you cut the individual heads off and then you glue them flat onto the wreath. That looks really nice, but not everything's going to go that way. The status would probably fall to pieces if I cut it too short, or it's going to take me a lot of time to cover it with something like that. But a few pops of that would be nice as well. So the more important part when you're working with a zinnia, so first before we dry, I'm stripping those leaves. So it's just nothing in the way if I was binding these. If I was hanging them upside down, what I talked about layering in the bundle, I wouldn't want to dry them like this because the petals are going to touch. So I'm going to, put my smaller one up high, my bigger one on the bottom, and I'm going to bind it like this. That way they're going to dry a little better, pop those leaves off. But if we wanted to dry them upside down, the thing you can do is take floral wire, and then we're going to wire it put some wire in it, and then bend it to the shape we want when we go to design. The easiest way is you go through the center, and if you can work it out, you can find the hollow stem, and then you're going to go all the way down till it comes out the other side. Then I'm going to cut maybe an inch. I'm going to pull it up a little bit, make a little hook, and then I'm going to go to the bottom and pull that hook through. I'm trying to get it where y'all can see it. I'm pulling my hook through, and now you cannot see that there's a wire in it. Now this wire allows me to bend the stem how I want, and then dry it in that direction. You know, I can hang it like this to dry. So it's going to stay dried in this position. If I'm drying my zinnias, I really don't want them all facing straight up and down, because then I can't use them in a vase. They're all facing straight up and down. So I want them angled. That way I could angle it the way I want, so it's facing outward. There's different gauges of wire, so the bigger the number, the skinnier the wire is. So sometimes this might be too thin to hold the bend I want. So I can use a thicker wire and do very similar. So it may not make it down the stem all the way, but we can try. If it doesn't, we would just come out, push it through like at an angle, and then I'm going to run it down the stem. This would be if you don't care if you see the stem, the wire, but you can always find brown tape, and then you would tape the wire all the way up so you can't see it. Just tape it all the way up. This is floral tape. You can buy it at even Walmart, at hobby stores are great. But you would do it the same way. And so then I've got a really thick wire in there that I can bend a thicker stem with. So that's one way to get the shape you want. Now, if I'm working with, I didn't cut one eucalyptus, but we can work with the celosia. So the celosia, one of them was droopy. So say when I cut this, it was drooping. So say it's drooping and I want it straight. I can take a very thick wire. I think this is like a 16 gauge. And I'm just going to start at the bottom. I'm going to lightly wrap it around and turn my stem. I should have stripped these leaves, but we'll make it work. And so I've not stuck this heavy wire into the stem, because I'm going to hopefully remove it once it's dried. So I basically just wound it around, and then I can bend it to the shape I want. When it dries, I can unbend this wire. So then I've dried at the shape I want. Does that make sense to everybody? I'd be happy to demo up close if you are struggling to understand you. I did bring some Cosmo. So I showed you the really ugly one that dried in the vase. Let's see if I can find it again. So not so great. We might have better luck if we dried this by hanging. These leaves are so thin, they're just going to shatter, I believe, when we dry them. So I want to remove all of the leaves, because I really want the pretty flower. So I tried hanging it upside down, or this would be one that you could hang right side up to dry, since these petals may close up if we dry them upside down. For this one, I would take my thinnest wire. This would be probably a 21 millimeter. So like I said, the bigger the number, the thinner the wire. I don't know why. That doesn't make sense to me, but that's how it is. So it must be true. I'm going to do the same thing, but with this thinner wire, I'm just going to slowly wrap it around. And then I'm going to just bend the shape I want. When this was dry, I'd remove the wire carefully. I'm going to still find that the head is going to droop and hang no matter what. So what I can do is then take a smaller piece of the wire. Once I've got the curve I want, I can take a small piece. I'm just going to shove it into the head just barely. And then I'm going to tape the wire to the stem. That's going to ensure that the neck of the flower doesn't become too brittle. I just broke it now, but you get what I'm saying. Broke it further down, but that's going to prevent the head from just popping off once it's dry. Let's see, did I forget anything? Oh yeah, the spray. So this is a spray you can purchase at hobby stores. It's to help preserve dried flowers. It's going to keep anything that's going to shed very easily from shedding. It's going to work like the hairspray you mentioned.
It's cheaper too.
Probably, yeah. These are scented though, so if you don't the chemical smell of hairspray, this would be scented slightly. Not too bad, but you can still tell you sprayed it with something. This is eucalyptus. So I showed you the nice blue eucalyptus, the really straight stem. This is lemon eucalyptus. These leaves are really thin though, so these are not going to dry very nicely. I'm going to hang it upside down to dry, but I can tell these leaves are so thin, they're not going to be the prettiest. But it would still smell like the lemon eucalyptus. So this would be a fun one to dry as well. But I'm not going to be able to use it in arrangements like I was that eucalyptus. This would just be a dry bundle you could hang in your house. One more little floral tip. So this is floral tape. This is what I was wrapping the stems in. It's a little stretchy. Its magic is in the stretch. So as you wrap something, you're pulling just a little. So if you've ever bought this and haven't been able to figure out how to use it, you just have to pull it. I always secure it on one end with my thumb, and then I rotate, and I pull tight as I rotate. That's what makes it stick. It sticks to itself very easily that way, but if you pull it as you turn, it's going to stick to the stem. That is called floral tape. And then this is called, I know it as strapping tape. So when we use floral foam on big displays or installations, or even a foam block to use in a casket spray, our tray underneath, we're going to strap this to that with this. This is a lot like duct tape. I think they call it waterproof tape. So this tape is not going to stick if something's wet, but this will. This one is also useful. You can find it at hobby stores as well. I just like to tell people the difference. If you're using this on the wire, I would probably try to avoid that. This is going to be a whole lot uglier than maybe a brown or even the green floral tape, because this looks real shiny and looks like duct tape. So we can compare it. But I think that's all my tips. If you want to come up and look at the leaves I dried, you're welcome to. I don't know how well they'll show up on the book. But some of them still have color 10 years later. A lot of them have the scientific, well, all of them have the scientific name and a common name, so you could identify common weeds. But they still look very nice for 10 years old. This one is a lot more brown, but this one's held its color very nicely. So I think that's it. If there's any questions, I'd be happy to answer questions. And then y'all can feel free to come on up and take a look at things.